Happy wild animals. If I'm out walking, I see everywhere happy animals. Every time I meet them and I see them, they seem to me to be happy in their lives. Yeah, thank you, but wait, what I have got to say, maybe you don't like it. The truth is, yes, the title might not tell you that, but it's about interventionalism, and indeed, I call it the case for wild animals, because I do believe that wild animals don't want our intervention, and I will argue for why. I might not have to motivate the whole talk, because we have heard a talk of wild animal suffering and why the the lecturer, felt that this is a vegan blind spot. We also heard about rewilding. So the topic is now has landed, and I might not have to speak about sort of motivate why. But what did trigger me was a talk that happened here at this conference, whenever, 8 years ago or something, and such a picture was shown of a bison in the snow, and the lecturer said, wouldn't you freeze or be cold if you were this bison, so why don't you help him if he's cold? And it triggered me because I'm often outside in the snow. I sleep in the snow, I camp in the snow. I have also slept in the snow without a tent. And I wouldn't want somebody to come and bring me heating or whatever it might be. But you might say, okay, I could get up and go somewhere else, but that's not the case if I'm deeply inside the mountains. The commonly mentioned causes for the suffering of animals are illnesses, hunger, weather, predation. Rarely old age is mentioned, which I find interesting because when it comes to old age, we humans have quite a problem. We're getting very old and we have a long time with old age, and those, you're probably all too young to feel that as well, but I can tell you, if you're getting old, that doesn't feel very good. And wild animals mostly don't, because if they're getting so old that they don't move fast enough, they might be predated on. When I talk about the wild and how lovely it is, then people might, or did tell me, this is an idyllic view, this is called nature bias, that actually nature is not as nice as it sounds. And one example for that, in my view, is these emperor penguins in the Antarctic. They, as you might know, there's a film about it, the male penguins take the eggs on their feet and then they walk deep into the Antarctic, and then they stand still there for months without eating, and in minus 50 degrees Celsius before the winter night is over, and they can go back and feed in the ocean. And you might think this must be absolutely terrible, but but they do it. They do it on free will. They could just kick the egg away and said, fuck that, I'm going to swim in the ocean. And they decide to do it. I conclude, trusting that animals are autonomous beings, that they actually want to do that. And that might tell us that animals or other species, or even members of our own species, might feel very, very different to us when we sit on a sofa and there's double glazing outside, it's snowing in the winter storm, and I see an animal there. Might be that the animal thinks, poor guy, in the heated room, which is how I would feel. I prefer wilderness, and I'm out in the wild as much as I can. I feel that civilization is holding me in chains, that I'm not free and that I cannot go and live out there. In Austria, every square meter belongs to somebody, none to me, so I couldn't legally live anywhere. And I sadly haven't learned how to feed myself in the wild. There's a few pictures of my latest expeditions, if you want. Of the last 8 weeks, I spent most of them with my 2 children out camping, not on camping sites, but in the wild. We were in the Carpathians, we were in the Slovak Tatra, and we were in the Tyrolean Alps. And we were where there were wild bears, there were wolves, we met bears and wolves. There were bison. I've also met bison. I once slept on the floor, and suddenly, in the middle of the dark night, a big 600-kilo bison was standing 3 meters beside me. And I say, good, I want to be there, and I want to have the bisons in the forest, and I go especially into forests where there are bisons. The picture on the left down there is in Siberia. The picture in the middle below is the Dead Mountains in Austria. I spent many days and weeks in the deep snow out there, also in snowstorms. And on the right bottom, the picture is where I live. I live in a cabin, in a wood cabin that is from the year 1740. And I'm actually living in a forest, or on the forest side, in a little opening where there is a forest all around. And from my place, it is not that far to primeval forests, to forests that have never been touched. On the left up right, this is a forest very near to me that has been actually never touched by humans. These are little jewels out in the wilderness, and I appreciate it very much that they exist, and it is a very strong feeling of connection when I'm out there. The picture on the right up is Scandinavia. Do animals suffer in the wild? Yes, sure, they do. The suffering in the sense of being cold, that happens, suffering being bitten, being maybe killed when you're killed. Yes, that happens, but the question is, what is the normal average life of a normal average creature in the wild? And I have this argument from evolution, which I believe is very stringent and convincing. When an animal suffers, it isn't happy. It has other things to do than procreate, so it won't have offspring. Happiness, on the contrary, means that you are capable of living in your environment, you feel that you have everything under control, and then you procreate. So evolution furthers beings that are happy in their environment, and those beings that are not happy in their environment will hand over less of their genes. The consequence is that populations of animals who are well adapted to their environment will be happy most of the time. And my conclusion, most wild animals will be happy most of the time. In contrast, farm animals have not evolutionarily adapted to being imprisoned. That has never happened in evolution. So they have no way of dealing with this. Very much in contrast to traumatic experience, but I will talk about it. So these animals suffer all the time. Confined animals suffer all the time. Most farmed animals are suffering most of the time, which is why in my animal rights work, I deal with farmed animals. I do also do wild animal protection work, but this is protecting them from human intervention. And a typical hunting human intervention, which is always argued for as being in favor of animal protection, is feeding them. They say there's winter, the poor animals don't find food, so they feed them. And the Austrian hunters actually feed all year round at some places, and they have what they call winter enclosure, which they attract the animals, then close the fence, and then they live 8.5 months inside an enclosure. This is wild animals being fed, and then they open it up again. So, and there is, if you approached it naively, you might think this is nice of the hunters. I mean, the motivation is obvious. They want to have many animals in autumn that they can shoot and kill. But you could say feeding them in principle is a nice thing to do, but as a matter of fact, there's a lot of proof that it's very bad for the animals. On the right, you see a few arguments. Parasites. If lots of animals are at the same place and months on end, then they will give each other parasites. Actually, they feed them then with chemicals, and the chemicals have all sorts of side effects. They hand on illnesses. A typical wild population of red deer in Austria has a very low level of tuberculosis. If they live close together, they give each other tuberculosis, and it rises so far and so high that the hunters themselves suddenly say, okay, we have to shoot now a lot of deer because they have tuberculosis and hand it on to cattle. Same is true for chamois, these mountain goats. They suffer from many different illnesses if they are confined, if they eat on the same feeding places. If not, And this is a decisive thing to realize in the wild. If not, then they are so spread out that no illness can stay long enough to actually infect lots of animals. And there's a very big difference to our life here. We are often ill. Many people are very often ill. If I look at our office, there's constantly somebody ill. And that is because we're living so close that every illness is handed on all the time, and these illnesses run up and down. And this is not the case with wild animals. Not just that they are immunologically better adapted, but these illnesses don't run around from one to the other because they don't live as dense as we do. Also, if you feed them, there's a higher population. A population destroys their own habitat, forest destruction, very strong case against feeding. And also, you see on the right down there is a stag with a summer digestive system and a winter digestive system. This is very different. They need different food. If they're being fed, then they don't adapt with this, and this causes a lot of suffering. Also because they then have to eat a lot more, spend a lot more energy. Usually, in winter, they have a digestive system that is very slow. They also adapt, since they are creatures that have evolutionary come up in a winter northern hemisphere. They can cope with winter very well. So they cool down their toes, for example, so that they don't feel cold in the snow. Me, as a person whose species originated in Africa, I heat up my toes to 37 degrees all the time, and then the snow melts and my toes freeze. And I should not put that onto how deer feel or stags, because they are adapted, and this is not the case. Down on the right, you see a quote of a scientific study of the veterinary university, where they looked at the intestines of fed and non-fed deer, and they found that these fed deer are very much more under illness pressure. Happy wild animals. If I'm out walking, I see everywhere happy animals. Every time I meet them and I see them, they seem to me to be happy in their lives. On the left down, you see a picture that I took just a few weeks ago. I was down in the Danube Delta, and there were tens of thousands of birds, and I sat there for hours, for days actually, and they seemed to me all pretty happy. They didn't fight, they weren't ill, I didn't see any dead animals, so they were all happy. They seemed to be adapted to this environment, and it was fine. But now, mild animal suffering promoters might say, yeah, the ill animals are out of sight. They are somewhere hidden away. The picture a bit further up shows a roe deer. And this, I was, as a protester, at the driven shoot of roe deer in a forest area. And the hunters went through there with all their hunting dogs and flushed out every animal there was, and then they shot them. 200 hectares, they shot 12 roe deer. And they were in every bush and everywhere. And all 12 roe deer were very healthy and happy. The ill roe deer that supposedly are hidden away in the bushes just didn't exist. On the right up, there is a chamois in the snow. If you're out walking in the mountains in the winter, you see them. I've seen often chamois children play. They sit down in the snow, skittle down, and then they run up again and they slide down again, having a lot of fun and playing with each other. But there's also avalanche danger. When I walk with my dog, I sadly died lately, but when I walked with my dogs, I had 3 dogs altogether who lived with me. In the spring, late spring, I often found dead chamois under the snow that an avalanche had taken them down. Yes, this is a tragedy for those animals, but how much do they suffer? Sure, the death of an animal is something that matters, but how bad is it dying in an avalanche? I was in an avalanche. I was inside an avalanche. I was down the mountain. Firstly, I say, please leave avalanches be. Don't start coming with technology and remove avalanches. I want to be in a mountain range where there's avalanches, even if I'm inside and I might die of them. But if you're inside an avalanche, what happens if the avalanche, the snow presses you on the floor? You just breathe out CO2 and you can't breathe in oxygen enough. So what happens is that you get CO2 poisoning. And in contrast to pigs, you can't smell CO2. So you slowly get unconscious. And if you stay there, you die. But as a matter of fact, you don't suffer. You just slowly become unconscious. On the right below is ibex. Ibex is also a mountainous animal. Where I live, there are lots of them. I can see them. Chamois, obviously, too. Roe deer is all the time around. And these ibexes also live up in the snow, live up in high mountains, and in the winter they even go further up, where there is strong wind so that the grass might come out of the snow cover. I've often sat and watched them. I've seen them play. I've seen them fight for when it's the breeding season. I've never seen a dying or dead or injured or ill chamois, ibex, although I've seen lots of them, which supports the argument that these animals are most of the time very happy. Now that I hear from the interventionists, so from those people who want to get into changing wilderness, they say, but what about the animals like tadpoles? On the right down you see tadpoles. Tadpoles are whatever, hundreds, maybe thousands, little tadpoles from one frog. And at the end of the day, there can't be thousands becoming adults. So they die, and that might be terrible. Yes, if an animal dies, it's always terrible, but I tell you the tadpole story. During COVID, I had to stay in my cabin because of the lockdown. And I was there with my children, and it happened so that 100 meters away from us, there's a little wild pond, and in this pond, frogs keep laying eggs and eventually tadpoles. And we went there every day to look what they're doing. And first it snowed over and it was cold, and I thought, God, they weren't going to die. Then they didn't die. The snow went away, the ice went away. The tadpoles came out, and the tadpoles started milling around in this pond. Some grouped together. We sat there a long time watching them. Some dived down, some swam over, some isolated themselves. They were single. Some lay in the sun. Some were feeding or not. Some dived on the bottom. And for 2 months, we were there every day, and they seemed to me very, very happy. And then we happened to be there when 2 snakes came. And these 2 snakes dived into this pond, and they started eating up those tadpoles. And we sat there and watched it, and eventually 3 tadpoles survived that the snakes hadn't seen, and then the snakes left. Yes, they died, but most of the time, the tadpoles were very happy, which supports my conclusion at the beginning. In the middle, you see a picture of a bear. I was there with my children in the Carpathians, and I met bears. This bear came towards us. And this bear is about 300 kilos, maybe 400. He can easily kill us. It is not so that we are the primary apex predator there, and all animals can be killed by us. They are much stronger, and you have to be defensive and submissive towards them. But yes, I want to deliberately go where those big animals are that can kill me if they want to. One case of happy animal is the snow hare. And this is surprising because the snow hare has, in principle, a very hard life. Where I live, there's lots of snow hares. I see them all the time. They come and eat my apple trees. They love apple trees in the winter. They wait till the snow grows so high that the protection of the tree is covered, and then they start eating up the tree. Yes, my apple trees die, but I mean the snow hares don't hibernate. They live in the harsh conditions of winter, and they have very many predators they have to be afraid of. There's eagle and owl in the sky, there's wolf, there's lynx, there's fox, there's badger, there's martens. And they have a tough environment. There's a study I bought because snow hares live with me. I bought this scientific study that you see there, snow hare in the Alps. And there's 2 studies that are quoted in there, and one of them looked at killed animals by hunters, if they're healthy or not, and they found all of them were very healthy. And the bottom right was a study, and they found that they are not stressed. They looked at the stress hormones in the scat and found that they are not stressed. Okay, you might say, I can't speak with animals. The snow hare might be very unhappy, but looking happy, being healthy and not stressed, he might still be unhappy because he can't speak. Here I have a person, witness der Suusala, who could speak. He was in the Far East. He lived a nomadic life. He had this gun from his grandfather. He had a little bag on his back, and he walked through the jungle there. And this jungle is full of, not full, but there are tigers. There were tigers. There are still some. Tigers, leopards, brown bears, koala bears. There's wolverine. And he lived among them without a tent, in winters with lots of minus 20 degrees Celsius days. He slept out in the open, and he lived from hunting and gathering. And he was met by a Russian expedition, and 4 times in a row they came to look at this country because Russians wanted to colonize it. And he was met all the 4 times and joined this expedition for a while. And there is a biography about him. And actually what he did, and you see he lived, 60 years, 59 years. He lived, he was actually once bitten by a tiger in the night when he slept. The tiger came and bit him. And he then, the expedition, after the 4th expedition, the leader of the expedition took him with him into a town nearby, and felt that this guy must be really happy to be in civilization. He can have food on his table, warm house, a window, and safe environment, no tiger. He felt so locked up in there that he said, I want to go back into the wild, although he was 59 and losing his eyesight. And now the tragedy, on the way back into the wild, in civilization, he slept as he always did, just somewhere on the floor. There came a human, biggest predator, and killed him to take his gun. But this guy told us, I, as a person who lived in the wild, who is confronted with tigers who bite him, who has to live from day to day, alone, sleeping out in harsh winter nights, hungry also ever so often, I want to be in the wild, and I don't want to be brought to civilization, and I don't want anybody to help me. I have another witness. He's called Simon Wildauer, Austrian. I met his friends just a week ago. He was born in the left upper picture in the house in the back there, this house. So he grew up in civilization in this tiny mountain village. And when he was up in the pastures with his parents, his father's cattle, he decided, enough is enough, I don't want to be in civilization, I stay up in the wild. And then he built this cabin here on 2,200 meters height and stayed there for 40 years. And this cabin he built a bit further down where he stayed in the winter, because this is also 1,300 meters high and there's very much snow there. And what actually happened was, this is how it looks like there, and it is 19 kilometers from the next house of a human. And this has happened now. 40 years he stayed there. What did he eat? Nobody knows exactly, because he lived like a wild animal. He ran around there, hid when people came. He was seen eating different kind of plants. He definitely drank birch juice. He caught fish with his hands and then released them after a while. So he caught fish and ate them. But at some stage in doing this, he stopped eating fish even. So he might have been vegan, but nobody knows because nobody studied him. Fact is that 40 years into his living up there, he was found unconscious by a hunter, and the mountain rescue brought him down. It turned out that he had cancer. He had an operation, and then being awake in the hospital, the first thing he wanted is back into the wild. So he fled from the hospital, but he was caught again and brought back, and then he killed himself because he said, I don't want to live in civilization, I want to be in the wild. There's more and more cases of that kind. I suppose I haven't got that much time, but there's this family Lykov. You might know all these people you can find in the internet as well. Agafia, she grew up the first 40 years of her life isolated with her family, being vegan, not out of ethical convictions, but because they didn't have any metal. There's a lot of things she ate because she was studied in 1982. To cut a long story short, they also tried to bring her back into civilization, especially in the in her 70s, and she said, I don't understand how you people can live in civilization. It is so awful there. I want to go back into the wild. People like the Hadza you could bring as another example. But this example is very important if people say you're speciesist if you don't help animals but help humans. This is North Sentinelese, an island in the Indian Ocean. Maybe you've heard of it, I don't know. But in this island, a group of indigenous people live who don't want to have anything to do with civilization. If somebody arrives there, like a missionary did recently, they just kill him. The government in India says, let them do that. We don't go there and stop them. We don't go investigate that as murder. We consider them like wild animals. You don't go there. And they did protection zone around the island so that nobody should approach this island. And they live by themselves. And then there came a tsunami, and civilization thought we need to help them. They came with a helicopter, and you can see the video from the view of the helicopter. These people came out and shot arrows at the helicopter and say, you fuck off, leave us alone here. I want to live here, or we want to live here in the wild, free and uncolonized and unpaternalistic, helped by you. We want to stay there. And I question now, if those humans say that, and if those animals are happy, what would the typical wild animal say if you ask them, shall I come and intervene and do this and that? Or would they say, leave me alone, I want to live free? Tiny bit of snippet thoughts. This is a wild bear in Romania, and underneath an Andaman indigenous person. Tourists drive by, both bear and human beg for food. You might say they want to live in civilization because they beg from civilized people. But in both cases, it is the civilizational trap that is at work here, and it's actually dangerous to them. I wash my car every 3 years. Those who have driven with me or came with me, when I drive up to the camping site, will see how awful it looks. Anyway, so every time I go to this car wash, I see the same person there washing cars. I asked him how doing. Yeah, I've been 23 years standing here washing cars every day, 8 hours. And I said, what a life! What a life! So stand all the time, every day, washing cars. And then, when he has free time and his holidays, he goes out into the nature and does exactly that what wild animals always do. So is this a good deal? Is this a good deal to work mundane nonsense with the most of your life instead of living wild like the animals who are happy? Another example of the civilization bias is these blueberries. With my family, we used to gather blueberries, and it was a very lovely experience to do it together. They were very tasty. We sat them together and ate them in the evening. Nowadays, you go in the supermarkets and buy them, and they taste like shit. Anyway, you don't collect them. There is no energy spent to get that together. You just buy them in huge heaps if you want and stuff them in your mouth. But the experience is much worse. Civilizational trap, I have them in the supermarket. I don't need to gather them. Isn't that super? I have it so easy. But the whole experience has gone down the drain. All the lovely thing of it, all the being together and the exertion of getting those berries, finding them, being excited, I'm all gone. Civilization trapped you. On the right, this picture shows a mountain in the back, High Obir, where I was up, the first big mountain I climbed when I was 4 years old, together with my family. We went up, slept in a tent, went to the summit and down, and I have this now still a thought in my mind how wonderful that experience was. Today, you can drive up there. They built a road all the way to the top, and the family goes up there and says, look, lovely, we don't have to walk, isn't that brilliant? We stand on the top, look in the countryside. So easy, but the experience is shit compared to mine. It is exertion, it is suffering to get up there. You're in the lightning, you're in the rain. You might be cold and you're sweaty, but the experience is 1,000 times different. Civilizational trap, don't let yourself be trapped. American Indian movement, I have to jump now because the time's running out. American Indian movement, I read a couple of books about them. They forced them into education programs, thought civilization is the wonder for them, so they need to do this. If you read this, and if you see what happened to these children, you will not think that civilization was good for them. Wolf hunting versus human hunting, I think it was a topic here anyway, that is much better for the animals, especially fear. This is a couple of studies that show that animals are less afraid when they are wolf hunters than they are human hunters. Yes, the trophic cascade to biodiversity was mentioned. There is studies on the importance of wild animal populations for climate change. Yeah, and then this example on the right. This is a social media post by somebody who also is an interventionalist. And you see on the top this lawn with a robot lawnmower who goes up there all the time. If you lie down in there, it's like a sofa, it's dead. There is no different plants, there's only this grass, and there's no insect coming to you, just lying there as if you are on your sofa. This wild garden or wild meadow, very different. Try go in there, you will see insects sting you all the time, you're completely full of them. And this guy said here, isn't it better to have this upper lawn because there are no animals, and if there are no animals, they don't suffer. But as a matter of fact, this meadow gives life, happy lives, to many, many, many beings, from the birds to the insects. And it grows biodiversity, which is vital for our survival, because only if there's a diversity of plant and animal life, catastrophes can be overcome, like climate collapse. Also, old growth forests. I showed you the picture at the beginning, how important they are, but I need to jump in. Coming to traumatic violence, maybe this is the example of interventionalists, that this shows that life in the wild isn't that funny. This is Andreas Keeling. You might have heard of his experience where he was attacked by a bear. But have you seen his interview too? He says, I have no regrets being there. I'll go there again. And I don't think the bear is evil or I should do something against him. This is just part of nature, and you take that. I had a number of severe accidents. I was there when a guy fell down a mountain cliff. I myself had a rock falling on myself, and I had to save myself. I had a broken shoulder. I was falling in a crevasse, and it took me 36 hours to come out. I was in an avalanche. Recently, one of our activists was mountain walking, and while I, with my children, was hiding from the lightning, she was struck and died. But all this traumatic experience is part of nature, and I myself say I don't want to miss it. And that sounds maybe strange to you, but I can tell you, when I was inside, when these rocks fell on me, and I had to fight to come out, I did not feel the pain. I did not feel the pain. It was such a strong adrenaline rush for hours. I fought there and had to get out. I was climbing a rock cliff, and the shoulder was completely gone. There was this bone sticking out, and when I told my hand to lift, I only managed to move the bone, and after hours I got out, and then only did the pain start. So I conjecture, and this is not saying nature is intrinsically nice, but this is just a fact of life and of evolution, that if you're attacked and there's a dramatic accident, you don't feel the pain because you have to fight and flight and get away, and don't be hindered by pain. Pain only matters afterwards, when you still and you sort of think, here I am, then this pain tells you you have to do something about it, you have to keep the shoulder quiet and so on. But during the incident, you don't feel it. Okay. And last point, Georg wants me to stop. What about this? We humans say the evil wild predators kill so many animals, but I conjecture that every single vegan member of society is responsible for more suffering and death than any prey animal. And I have a number of reasons for that. One is the last point here. If you look at footprint and let calculate your footprint, you find in Austria, if you don't live at all, mean no fire, no heating, no house, no car, nothing, then you already need 1.64 Earths to live, because civilization in which you live uses up so many resources that it's actually far more than you're due. But also, we always forget rats and mice being killed. Even in our office area, everywhere rat traps. If you talk to them, millions of rats and mice, they killed in our name every day. Cars driving over animals. Mike Archer made this case against veganism that if you grow vegan food, you have so and so many dead mice because the machines driving over, killing the mice, or killing all sorts of other animals. I have a number of statistics of road kills. This is a picture of killing birds in Germany. You see that there's, 170 million just by agriculture, and then something like 108 by houses, 70 million by traffic. It's all also our responsibility, and equally the farmed animals that are being killed and the subsidies that we pay every time we buy a vegan product, a certain amount goes to subsidizing the killing of them. And therefore I ask, should we not swipe in front of our own homes first? Last point, the question of autonomy. Here, last time when there were these talks, I had long debates with Steen Brewers, and he was of the opinion autonomy means you can do many things, and more autonomy means you can do even more things. So for him, if you have an aeroplane, you're more autonomous than if you have not, because you can fly. I find that concept very strange. Christine Korsgaard, in her book, made the argument that to live in a way that you evolutionary have adapted to is autonomy. But Immanuel Kant, this philosopher that is actually the prelude to the civil law in Austria and Germany probably, he says autonomy means living according to your own rules. And that does not mean that there's avalanches that restrict your autonomy. You have the autonomy to risk crossing the avalanche slope or to stay, but the avalanche doesn't restrict your autonomy, neither does lightning or whatever. So this is the last slide, or the last but one. My solution to that is the following. If you read Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he tells you why you have to give up freedom if you are in a mass society. And that is, this mass society makes up rules, and you have to submit to them, and they call this the social contract. You submit to the rules, you give up your freedom, but you get security and safety and the help of them. And you have rights, and these basic rights are claims to the monopoly that you are saved. And now I propose the wilderness contract, which is you can have complete freedom, but no safety, no security, no rules by anyone, but on the other hand, no help by anyone. And you don't have rights. As a wilderness contract participant, you don't have rights because there's no monopoly of violence where you can claim your rights to. Never mind which species you are. You only have the right that nobody from civilization intervenes with you, because this is infringing on the wilderness contract. So domestic animals and humans are part of the social contract, so they have to stick to our rules, but we feed and keep them safe. Wild animals are part of the wilderness contract. They have complete freedom and autonomy, but no rights, and they are not protected by humans and by human society. Last word, that does not mean that if I'm individually meeting an animal in need, like this koala bear in the fire, that I go and help them individually. That doesn't restrict their freedom. It would restrict their freedom if there were everywhere cameras watching them what they do, if there's a fence keeping dangers off and so on. That restricts the freedom. So we have that question here in society too. Do we want security, cameras everywhere, maybe a chip in the skin so that everybody, or there's some monopoly of violence, always knows where we are, and if somebody threatened us, immediately there's call for help? So we give up freedom but have maximum security, or we don't want this kind of security but have more freedom, that the government doesn't control me and don't need to go anywhere and register, and I'm just out and about and do what I like. And my claim is, you might say, okay, I give up my freedom for safety, but don't tell those who want to be free that they have to give up their freedom as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Exactly 40 minutes. Thanks to David, we have room for one short question and one short answer, and then please contact Martin after. Okay, go ahead.
So it seems to me that your belief that animals are happy most of the time is relying quite a lot on your anecdotal experience. And I can relate to that. You know, if I go for a walk, I'm not seeing lots of miserable-looking animals, and I think there are a number of reasons why that could be the case. Yes, animals have probably evolved to hide signs of injury and illness because it makes them more susceptible to predation. It's also the case that there's many parts of nature that I just don't see. I mean, I'm not seeing all the animals underwater, and even if I were seeing the animals, it might not be easy to actually recognize their suffering. I mean, what does a hungry fish look like? How about a hungry tadpole? Secondly, it seems like a huge crux of this argument is relying on this idea that wild animals should be free. But it seems to me that your conception of freedom is very anthropocentric. You're only concerned with whether humans are infringing upon the freedom of the wild animal rather than centering the animal's experience and thinking about what it means for them to be free. Now, you came to my talk yesterday where I showed the story of an elephant who was trapped in the mud and completely immobilized for the night, abandoned by their parents, couldn't move. And then they were found by hyenas who slowly ate them alive over several hours. Now, to me, any meaningful conception of freedom would tell me that that elephant is not free and is not living an autonomous life.
Thank you. Short answer, please.
Yeah. Firstly, that these all hidden ill animals, it's not just my personal experience. As you say, it's even yours. It's all of us. If we go in the wild, we will see always happy animals, and it must tell us something statistically. But I have provided some scientific studies on this, and especially evolutionary argument. If animals were generally unhappy, then they wouldn't procreate as much as those who are. And why should that not mean eventually that animals adapt so much to their environment that they actually are happy most of the time? And I don't see at all that this freedom concept is anthropocentric, because animal knows very well if it's confined, if it's watched. Animal wants to hide away, animal runs off. If you go in a fur farm, and you open the cage, the mink comes out and runs off. And he goes out in the wild and he tries to survive. And if he's hungry, he's not coming back and trying to get food from the cage. He's staying away because he doesn't want to be locked up. And that tells us something. In the cage, he would be safe and he could get food and whatever. And outside, he is hungry, he has to run around. And he prefers to be outside. And that's what I call freedom, that he can do what he likes and nobody is there to intervene.
Yeah, time's up. Thanks again, David, for the time, and feel free to contact Martin at the conference and keep the discussion going.